Imagine this. You're standing in front of a woman you're attracted to. The conversation has barely begun, and suddenly, silence. Your mind goes blank. You feel the void, and by pure instinct, you shoot the typical absurd question. So, what do you do in your free time? She smiles politely, but in her eyes there's no longer interest, only courtesy. That instant, which seemed like your chance, turns into yet another failure to add to the list. And you know it. It's not the first time this has happened. What nobody tells you is that it wasn't the lack of words that sunk you, but the excess of predictability. Because a man who tries to fill every space with obviousness transmits anxiety, not magnetism. And here comes the unsettling part. While you were talking to please, she had already decided there was nothing to figure out about you. No mystery, no value. Today, I'm going to teach you the opposite. An approach inspired by the most calculating minds in history, where silence becomes a weapon, the gaze a challenge, and words pieces that are rationed like sweet poison. Stay until the end, because you're going to discover how to stop begging for approval and start awakening real intrigue, to the point where she is the one trying to decipher you. Most men believe that seduction is about impressing, about showing what they have, talking about their achievements, telling stories that boost their ego. But that strategy is not only weak, it's counterproductive. Because the moment you try to prove your value with words, you lose it. The real power isn't in convincing, but in generating the sensation that you don't need to convince anyone. Think about this. When you walk into a room and someone floods you with information about themselves, what do you feel? Exactly. You detect insecurity disguised as enthusiasm. The human mind perceives it instantly, and women sense it with brutal clarity. Here's the part very few understand. Attraction is not born from excessive communication, but from the economy of your gestures. Silence, when well used, is like a labyrinth in which the other person becomes trapped. She doesn't know what you think. She doesn't know what you feel, and that uncertainty awakens her deepest instinct, the desire to decipher you. Mystery is a slow but devastating poison. And the curious thing is that most people run from it because they can't stand the void. They prefer to fill every uncomfortable gap with noise, not realizing that it's the discomfort itself that generates tension. I want you to stop and think about something. Why does silence scare us so much? Because in silence, who you really are is revealed. You can't hide behind jokes or automatic questions. You're naked in front of the other person's gaze. And that exposure is frightening. But it's precisely that fear which, if you master it, becomes your greatest advantage. A man who doesn't rush to speak sends an unconscious signal. I don't need your approval. I'm comfortable in my own skin. And believe me, that's the essence of magnetism. Now here comes an even darker and more fascinating idea: subtle provocation. I'm not talking about being offensive or rude, but about introducing small cracks into the other person's security. An ambiguous comment, a restrained smile, a calculated pause. Each gesture is like a silent challenge. As if you were saying, without words, "Show me who you really are. Surprise me." And that completely disrupts the mental script of most women, who are used to men willing to give it all away in the first round. Let me put it this way. The human mind can't stand open enigmas. When you leave a void, the other person wants to fill it. When you introduce doubt, the other person wants to solve it. And when you plant the mystery of your silence, you generate a psychological tension that, far from pushing away, attracts with almost irresistible force. It's not manipulation, it's understanding how attention works. because what is hidden becomes more valuable than what is displayed. This is where the game turns Machiavellian. Instead of rushing to explain yourself, observe. Observe how she moves her hands, how her tone of voice changes, how she tries to measure your reaction. Every detail is information, every gesture a map. And while she struggles to read you, you remain calm, revealing nothing more than necessary. That's the balance. You give crumbs of information, never the full banquet. See it now? The key isn't to talk more, but to talk less, and with surgical intent. Each word you speak must carry the weight of a piece on a board. Because if you fill the air with trivialities, you dilute your value. But if you choose your words precisely, each phrase becomes an echo that lingers in the mind of the listener long after you've stopped speaking. And here comes the part no one dares admit. The man who stays silent and observes transmits a dangerous sensation. Dangerous because you don't know if he's evaluating you, approving you, or dismissing you. That ambiguity activates the need to prove yourself. And when she's the one trying to show authenticity, when she's the one trying to decipher you, you've flipped the board in your favor. You've gone from chasing to being chased. So forget the idea that silence is weakness. Silence is a weapon. Mystery is a magnet, and subtle provocation is the spark that ignites the tension. Understand this, and you'll never have to beg for attention again, because real attraction arises when you make the other person wonder what you're hiding. Because the unknown always weighs more than the obvious. There's a detail almost no one considers. Conversation is not an exchange of information, but an invisible pulse of energy. It's not about what you say, but what you transmit as you say it. Two people can speak the same words and generate completely different reactions. Why? Because what matters is not the phrase, but the intention hidden behind it. And here's the trap most men fall into. They speak to fill the space, to avoid rejection, to avoid looking bad. That defensive intent is detected instantly and turns any phrase into an empty sigh. Now imagine the opposite. A man who speaks little, who doesn't seem rushed, who answers calmly with a slight smile that reveals nothing. That man not only communicates confidence, but also shifts the dynamic of the encounter. He's no longer the one seeking validation. She's the one starting to read between the lines, interpreting what he leaves unsaid, wondering what lies behind that serenity. And the most fascinating part of all is that this tension doesn't come from effort, but from the absence of it. Real power lies in restraint. But let me take you deeper. Silence and intrigue aren't just attraction techniques, they're reflections of an inner state. If you can't coexist with your own emptiness, if you can't stand your own solitude, if you can't bear a minute without distractions, you'll never project calm in someone else's presence. That's why I say the root of it all is your relationship with yourself. A man who feels complete doesn't rush to fill gaps, doesn't need to overtalk, doesn't seek to escape discomfort. He embraces it, and in doing so, projects a type of strength that can't be faked. Notice the paradox. The less you try to impress, the more impact you generate. Because in a world where everyone screams to be heard, the one who stays silent becomes an unignorable mystery. And that mystery isn't a superficial trick, it's the consequence of your emotional control. Think carefully. Who has more power? The one who needs everyone's attention to feel alive, or the one who can sit quietly in a corner and still dominate the atmosphere? Exactly, the second one. And that dominance doesn't come from aggressiveness, but from the calm it radiates. Here comes a key point very few dare to touch. Selectivity. Real attraction doesn't come from being accepted by everyone, but from showing that not everyone has access to you. When a woman senses that you're selective, that you observe before giving your attention, that you don't let yourself be dragged by first impressions, it activates an ancestral psychological mechanism, the need to validate herself in front of you. Because humans always value more what seems hard to obtain. Scarcity generates desire, and your calm selectivity is the manifestation of that scarcity. But don't confuse selectivity with arrogance. It's not about despising, but filtering with elegance. It's that analyzing gaze, that gesture that hints that not everyone can spark your interest. And that small nuance completely changes perception. You're no longer the one seeking approval. You're the one evaluating, the one deciding, the one setting the standard. That's the true inversion of roles, and that's where real magnetism begins. Let's go even further. The psychology of mystery has roots in something very deep. The human brain hates narrative gaps. When someone doesn't give you all the information, your mind obsesses over completing it. It's like a book with torn out pages, impossible to put down because you want to know what happens in those gaps. You can be that book, not by giving everything about yourself on the first page, but by showing only fragments, pieces that suggest more than they reveal. That's the power of the enigma. You never fully close yourself, always leaving a hidden part that provokes constant curiosity. And here's where provocation comes in, but taken to a more sophisticated level. I'm not talking about cheap jokes or childish sarcasm, but about small tensions sewn with precision. For example, answering with an ambiguous smile instead of a clear affirmation. Or returning a question with another that hints you're also evaluating. Every detail, every gesture is like a thread she tries to follow to reach the center of your labyrinth. And the most intriguing part is she'll never find a definitive center, because your strength lies in being an open space, impossible to grasp in a single encounter. See what's happening here? You shift from being predictable to being unpredictable. And unpredictability, though uncomfortable, is always magnetic. Danger attracts, uncertainty fascinates. A man who doesn't follow an expected script creates that sense of risk that triggers the most primitive instinct of attraction. Because stability bores, but uncertainty hooks. And if you can move within that delicate balance between calm and provocation, between silence and spark, you become someone impossible to ignore. I want you to understand something essential. It's not about speaking less just for the sake of it, nor about playing mystery as a disguise. It's about building a presence so solid you don't need embellishments. Your silences shouldn't feel forced. They should feel natural. Your provocations shouldn't be attacks, but elegant challenges. Your selectivity shouldn't be contempt, but a standard. When you reach that point, your mere presence becomes a magnetic field. And then, the dynamic changes forever. You're no longer the one trying to be accepted, but the one she seeks to enter your world. And now I'll throw you the question. How much longer will you keep trying to fill gaps with empty words? How much longer will you sacrifice your value for the illusion of pleasing? Because the truth is brutal. Every time you overtalk, you give away power. And every time you learn to keep quiet with intent, you take it back. In the end, the game is not about words, but about energy, tension, and mystery. And the one who masters that, masters attraction. There's something even more unsettling about all this. The way your poorly managed vulnerability becomes a silent confession of weakness. Every time you speak without being asked, every time you reveal too much of yourself in a desperate attempt to connect, you're giving away your greatest treasure, your mystery. because what is given without being requested loses value, and what is hidden, what remains inaccessible, becomes an object of obsession. The most common mistake is thinking that being transparent from the start will make you seem authentic. But authenticity is not the obvious. Authenticity is what is revealed slowly, with patience, once the other person has proven they deserve to see it. Think of it as a play. The curtain doesn't rise all at once to show everything in the first act. Each scene is designed to increase tension, to hold attention, to let the audience wonder what comes next. And yet, most men walk on stage, and within the first 5 minutes have already told everything. Who they are, what they do, what they think, what they want. The result? There's nothing left to discover. And when there's nothing to decipher, interest dies. Now observe how the mind works in this kind of interaction. When someone holds back, they awaken our curiosity. But when someone spills over, they awaken our indifference. Excess information is a form of noise, and noise tires. What keeps attention hooked is not the abundance of data, but the sensation that there's more than meets the eye. That's why history's great seducers weren't the ones who talked endlessly, but the ones who knew when to stay silent, when to leave space, when to drop a phrase that lingered in the air like a riddle. Here's where a brutal concept comes in: the asymmetry of interest. When someone feels they have to make an effort to win you over, the balance shifts. Attraction is not about immediate equality. It's about creating a slight imbalance that pushes the other person to move toward you. And that asymmetry is built from the first moment you decide not to give away your entire arsenal at once. Because the one who emotionally strips too fast becomes exposed, and what's exposed is fragile. On the other hand, the one who manages his revelations projects strength. And now we reach another level: psychological reading. While most are talking, you should be observing. Not only what she says, but how she says it. The tremble in her voice, the speed of her response, the way she crosses her arms or plays with her hair. Every gesture reveals more than 1,000 words. And when you're able to read all that in silence, without interrupting, without showing anxiety, you project a rare, almost unsettling ability: the to see more than others see. That perception turns the encounter into something completely different, because you're no longer just another man seeking her attention. You're someone dissecting her calmly, someone who seems to have access to her inner layers without needing to ask everything. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. The fascinating thing is that when you start reading instead of speaking, an unexpected effect occurs. The other person begins to feel exposed. And that exposure creates a very powerful tension, because most people are used to having control in superficial conversations. But when they sense you're listening on a deeper level, that you're noticing details others don't, they feel a strange vertigo. The vertigo of truly being seen. And that sensation, though uncomfortable, is addictive. Do you understand the power here? It's not about saying the right thing, it's about creating a space where the other person feels they can't hide. That space isn't built with speeches, it's built with presence, with silence, with a gaze fixed on details she didn't know she was revealing. And when someone feels they've shown more than they planned, they enter a dangerous psychological terrain. They need to regain balance. How do they do it? By seeking your approval, trying to prove themselves authentic, wanting to show they deserve your attention. And then, without forcing anything, without artificial games, you achieve that she's the one taking the next step. She's the one who wants to tell you more. She's the one who feels drawn to that calm of yours that acts like an unflinching mirror. Because while others wear themselves out trying to be memorable with banal phrases, you become unforgettable simply by remaining centered, letting the mystery speak for you. Here's where everything connects: silence, selectivity, observation, subtle provocation. They're not isolated pieces. They're gears of the same mechanism. The power of not seeking approval. The man who doesn't beg for attention receives it. The one who doesn't rush attracts. The one who doesn't spill over fascinates. And the one who observes instead of speaking becomes a mirror in which the other person reflects with both fear and desire. What I want you to understand is this isn't just advice for having better conversations. It's a paradigm shift. It's about stopping living from scarcity and starting to live from abundance. Because when you know who you are, when you don't need anyone's validation, your mere presence becomes a magnet. And then conversations stop being desperate attempts and turn into psychological games where you have the control. And now that we've come this far, I want to leave you with one last idea you won't be able to get out of your head. What attracts the most is not what you show, but what you choose not to show. Think of it like a secret locked in a chest. It doesn't matter if inside there's gold or just stones. The mystery of not knowing makes that chest irresistible. That's the paradox. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be inaccessible at the right moment. When you learn to leave things unsaid, to gift silences that weigh more than 1,000 speeches, you become the kind of man who's unforgettable, even if he's spoken only a handful of words. The conversation stops being a battlefield where you fight to stand out and becomes a stage where others try to decipher your invisible script. That's what ordinary men never understand. That power isn't in being approved, but in provoking questions no one can answer. And you, from that moment, stop being just another guy and become an enigma. And enigmas, believe me, never go unnoticed. So the next time you sit across from someone you're attracted to, remember what you've discovered today. Don't rush. Don't try to fill every second. Don't play all your cards. Stand firm in your calm. Observe, provoke with subtlety. Let the mystery do its work. Because in the end, what captivates is not the obvious, but what never fully reveals itself. If you've made it this far, it's because deep inside you already know. Your value is not measured in accumulated words, but in the presence you transmit even when you're silent. And if you want to keep exploring these uncomfortable truths, subscribe right now, because what's coming will challenge your view of attraction and psychology even more. Leave me a phrase in the comments so I know you were here. Write, "Silence is power." That will be our secret signal, the mark of those who've understood the hidden game few dare to play. And now I'll say goodbye, but not like everyone else. I won't say farewell or see you later. I'll just leave a silence. A silence that, even when you close this video, will keep echoing in your mind, pushing you to decipher it. Because remember, what is left unsaid always weighs more